My mother-in-law brought my wife's ex to our anniversary dinner and said, "He's here in case you still need an option." My wife snickered at me, so I slid my phone across the table and said, "Then check the message from your lawyer." I had been married to my wife for 8 years when her mother brought her ex-boyfriend to our anniversary dinner. That sounds bad enough by itself, but the part that still bothers me is that her mother did it like she had made a completely reasonable reservation mistake. She had called me that afternoon to confirm the restaurant, the time, and whether I had remembered to order the cake. I told her everything was handled. She sounded pleased. I had no reason to think anything unusual was going to happen. My wife, Emily, had spent the entire week talking about how she wanted our 8th anniversary to be low-key. We both had work the next morning, so we agreed on dinner at a nice restaurant, dessert somewhere nearby, and then home. Her parents had offered to join us for dessert because they said they wanted to celebrate with us. I wasn't thrilled about that part, but I figured it was one evening. Emily was very close to her parents, especially her mother, Linda. I had learned over the years that saying no to Linda usually turned into a much bigger event than simply saying yes, so I agreed. I left work early that Friday, stopped at the grocery store because we were out of coffee, picked up the anniversary cake and went home to change. Emily was already getting ready. She had chosen a dress she had worn once before, and I remember thinking she looked great. Everything felt normal. That is probably why what happened later bothered me so much. There wasn't some obvious warning sign. There wasn't a huge fight before dinner. There wasn't an affair accusation hanging over us. There was just a normal Friday evening that suddenly became something I couldn't explain. Linda arrived at the restaurant about 15 minutes after we did. She wasn't alone. Her husband, Frank, was with her, and so was a man I recognized immediately. His name was Daniel. Daniel had dated Emily for about 3 years before I met her. I had heard his name before. I had seen one old photograph of him in an album at Emily's parents' house. I knew they had lived together for a while. I also knew their relationship had ended badly enough that Emily didn't usually talk about him. I had never met him until that night. I honestly thought there had been some mistake. I looked at Emily first because I wanted to see her reaction. She looked at Daniel. Then she looked at her mother. Then she looked at me. And she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic smile. She actually snickered. I remember that very clearly. I asked what was going on. Linda sat down like nothing was unusual. She explained that Daniel had been in town visiting an old friend and that she thought it would be nice for everyone to catch up. I asked why nobody had mentioned this to me. She shrugged it off as though I was making something out of nothing. Then she said the sentence that turned the entire dinner into something else. She said Daniel was there in case Emily still needed an option. I didn't understand what she meant. I actually thought I had misheard her. Then she repeated it. She was talking about my wife, at our anniversary dinner, with her ex sitting 3 seats away. Emily laughed again. That was when I realized I wasn't dealing with an awkward joke. I was being humiliated. I could have stood up. I could have walked out. I could have started yelling. Instead, I took my phone out of my pocket. I unlocked it. I found the message I had received earlier that afternoon. Then I slid the phone across the table toward Emily. I told her to check the message from her lawyer. Her face changed immediately. And that was the moment I knew she had not told me everything about what had been happening in our marriage. To understand why that message mattered, I have to go back about 6 months. Emily and I had not always been like this. When we met, I was working in a small office and she was finishing a professional certification. We didn't have much money. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment. We bought used furniture. We cooked most nights because eating out felt expensive. Those were honestly some of the best years of my life. We fought about normal things, bills, laundry, whose turn it was to buy groceries, whether we could afford a vacation. Nothing felt dangerous. When we bought our house, we were both proud of ourselves. We had saved for the down payment together. The mortgage was in both our names. We had separate checking accounts for personal spending, but we maintained a joint account for household expenses. We both contributed to it. We also had a shared savings account for emergencies. It wasn't romantic, but it worked. For the first few years, I thought we had a very solid marriage. The problem started slowly. Emily began spending more time with her mother. That wasn't unusual by itself. Linda had always been involved in our lives. She helped Emily with shopping, birthdays, family events, and sometimes even work decisions. I occasionally found it excessive, but I tried not to interfere. Then Emily started coming home later. She would say she had been at her parents' house. Sometimes she had been. Other times she would say she had met a friend. I didn't think much of it. I had my own work schedule. I was often tired. I didn't want to become the husband who demanded an explanation every time his wife was 20 minutes late. Looking back, I can see that I was probably too trusting. But I still don't think trust was the mistake. The mistake was noticing changes and convincing myself they didn't matter because I didn't want conflict. About 5 months before our anniversary, Emily started talking about how unhappy she was. She didn't say she wanted a divorce. She said she felt like she had lost herself. I listened. I asked what I could do differently. She said she didn't know. I suggested counseling. She agreed. We went to 2 sessions, then she stopped going. She said the counselor was too focused on communication and not enough on how she felt. I asked what she wanted instead. She didn't know. That became a pattern. Whenever I tried to solve something, she said solving it wasn't the point. Whenever I asked what she needed, she said she needed space. So I gave her space. That probably wasn't enough, but I also didn't know what I was supposed to do with a problem nobody would define. Around the same time, Linda began making strange comments about my role in the family. She would make jokes about Emily being the one who had sacrificed more. She would mention how much easier my career had been. She would sometimes say that Emily deserved someone who understood her better. I noticed it. I didn't confront her. I assumed she was being protective of her daughter. That was another mistake. Then one Sunday, Emily and I went to her parents' house for dinner. Daniel's name came up. It happened because Frank was talking about someone they both knew from years ago. Emily became quiet. Linda asked if Emily remembered Daniel. Emily said of course she did. I didn't think much of it. Then Linda asked whether Emily had ever wondered what her life would have looked like if she had stayed with him. I remember looking at Emily. She didn't answer. Linda laughed and changed the subject. I drove home that night feeling uncomfortable. I asked Emily if there was something going on with Daniel. She said no. I believed her. At least I thought I did. About 2 weeks later, I noticed that our joint savings account had less money in it than expected. There was a withdrawal for $7,500. I asked Emily about it. She said she had moved the money temporarily because her mother needed help. I was surprised. Linda had never asked me for money. Emily said it was none of my business because she was going to put it back. That bothered me. The money was in a joint account. I told her I didn't care if she wanted to help her mother, but I needed to know before a large withdrawal. She apologized. She said she understood. I let it go. The money came back 3 weeks later. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A month later, there was another withdrawal. This time it was $4,000. Emily said it was for an attorney. I asked why her mother needed an attorney. She said it was a personal issue and that I was asking too many questions. That was the first time I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't angry. I was confused. I asked whether the attorney was for Linda or Emily. Emily wouldn't answer. I told her I wasn't comfortable with joint money being used for legal expenses without my knowledge. She became defensive. The argument lasted about 20 minutes. Eventually, she said she would replace the money. She did. But after that, I started checking our statements more carefully. I didn't spy on her. I didn't install anything. I didn't go through her phone. I simply started keeping copies of our financial records. I downloaded the bank statements. I saved mortgage records. I saved insurance documents. I saved our tax returns. I had always been organized with paperwork because my job required it. At the time, I thought I was just protecting myself from financial mistakes. I didn't know how important that habit would become. About 3 weeks later, I found an envelope in our mailbox addressed to Emily from a law firm. She wasn't home. I didn't open it. I put it on the kitchen counter. When she came home, I mentioned it. She picked it up quickly. I asked whether everything was okay. She said it was. Then she took the envelope into the bedroom. That bothered me more than I expected. I wasn't entitled to open her mail, but I was entitled to know whether my wife was secretly meeting with a lawyer about our marriage. I asked her directly. She said it was nothing. I asked whether she had contacted a divorce attorney. She said no. I believed her, or at least I wanted to. That was when I made another mistake. I decided that if I pushed too hard, I might destroy whatever chance we had of fixing things, so I stopped asking. For a while, things improved. Emily became more affectionate. She started cooking dinner again. She asked me about work. She suggested we take a weekend trip. I thought maybe we had turned a corner. I was relieved. I remember telling my brother that marriage sometimes went through strange periods and that ours was getting better. He asked whether I was sure. I said yes. I wish I could go back and hear myself saying that, because the improvement wasn't really an improvement. It was a pause. 2 weeks before our anniversary, Emily told me she wanted to celebrate with her parents. I said that was fine. She said her mother had already made the reservation. I asked where. She told me. I remember being happy that she seemed excited. I bought the cake. I made a reservation for brunch the next morning because I thought we could have some time alone after dinner. I also bought Emily a necklace, nothing extravagant. It was something she had mentioned liking months earlier. I wrapped it and hid it in my desk at work. Then came the Friday night dinner. Then Daniel walked in. When Linda made her comment about him being an option, I genuinely didn't know what to do. I looked at Frank. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me something. Frank wasn't surprised. Emily wasn't surprised. Linda wasn't surprised. I was the only person at that table who hadn't known Daniel was coming. That realization hurt more than the insult. I slid my phone across the table. The message was from an attorney whose name I recognized from the envelope I had seen. It had arrived that afternoon. The attorney had contacted me because Emily had apparently provided my name during a consultation. The message was short. It asked me to call the office regarding a matter involving marital property and documents I might need to preserve. It did not tell me everything. It did not need to. I had already spoken to the attorney earlier that day. I had called from my car during lunch. The attorney explained that Emily had consulted with the firm several weeks earlier about a potential separation. She had also discussed the possibility of claiming that certain money and property were hers separately. I had been shocked, but I hadn't confronted Emily immediately. The attorney told me not to make accusations. The attorney told me to preserve records and not move money impulsively. I followed that advice. I didn't know whether Emily had filed anything. I didn't know what she intended. I only knew that she had been talking to a lawyer without telling me. Then my mother-in-law brought Daniel to our anniversary dinner. I told Emily to read the message. She did. Her face went pale. Linda reached for the phone. Emily stopped her. That was the first time I had ever seen Emily physically prevent her mother from interfering in something. The table became completely quiet. I didn't ask Emily whether she was leaving me. I didn't ask whether she wanted Daniel back. I didn't ask why her mother had invited him. I just sat there. After a few seconds, Emily started explaining. She said she had only spoken to the attorney because she had been considering her options. She said she wasn't planning to leave. She said her mother had arranged the dinner because she thought Emily needed to remember what her life could have been. Then Daniel apologized. That confused me. He said he had not understood that I didn't know. He said Linda had contacted him and told him Emily was unhappy and that the marriage might be ending. He said he thought Emily wanted to see him. Emily immediately became angry with him. I could tell from the way she reacted that she hadn't expected him to say that. That was the first crack in the story. Linda insisted she had only been trying to help. She said she had watched her daughter become unhappy for years. She said she believed I was holding Emily back. I asked what exactly I had done to hold her back. She didn't answer. Instead, she started listing vague complaints. I worked too much. I didn't spend enough time with Emily. I didn't visit her parents enough. I was too focused on money. I didn't understand Emily emotionally. Some of those things were probably partly true. I worked long hours. I had missed a few family dinners. I had complained about Linda's involvement. I wasn't perfect. But none of those things explained why Linda had contacted my wife's ex and brought him to our anniversary dinner. Frank finally spoke. He said he thought the whole thing had gone too far. Linda became furious with him. She accused him of always taking my side. That surprised me. I had never thought Frank particularly liked me. Apparently, I had underestimated him too. The dinner ended without anyone eating dessert. The cake stayed in its box. I took it home. I don't know why, maybe because I had spent $35 on it, maybe because throwing it away felt like admitting something. Emily came home with me. She sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour. I asked her whether she wanted a divorce. She said she didn't know. I asked whether she was still involved with Daniel. She said no. I asked whether she had contacted him. She said she had exchanged a few messages because her mother had put them back in contact. That hurt. But I didn't yell. I asked whether she had met him privately. She said no. I asked whether she had planned to meet him after the anniversary dinner. She hesitated. That hesitation told me enough. She eventually admitted that Linda had suggested Emily meet Daniel for coffee the following week. Emily said she hadn't decided whether she would. I told her I couldn't control whether she met him, but I could control whether I stayed in a marriage where my wife was keeping options open while I was still paying the bills and planning anniversaries. She cried. I did too. Neither of us slept much that night. The next morning, I canceled the brunch. Emily asked me not to leave the house. I told her I wasn't leaving permanently. I needed space. I went to my brother's house. I didn't tell him everything. I just said things had gotten serious. He let me sleep on the couch. That morning, I called the attorney again. I was careful. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hide money. I didn't want to destroy Emily financially. I wanted to know what my legal obligations were and what I needed to protect. The attorney told me to gather records, so I did. I collected bank statements, mortgage statements, tax returns, insurance documents, retirement account records, property tax records, receipts for major home improvements, copies of the deed, our original mortgage paperwork, everything. I also made a timeline of major financial events. That was when I found something I hadn't noticed before. The $7,500 withdrawal from months earlier had not gone to Linda. It had gone to a law firm. The $4,000 withdrawal had gone to the same firm. I called the bank. They couldn't tell me what the payments were for. I called the attorney who represented me. She explained that I couldn't obtain Emily's confidential legal records. That was fair, but she also told me something important. If Emily intended to claim that money had been used for separate property or that certain assets belonged only to her, the source of those funds could matter, so I stopped trying to guess. I just documented everything. A week later, Emily moved into her parents' house. I stayed in our home. We agreed to communicate by text for practical matters. That arrangement lasted about 3 days. Then Linda started sending me messages. Some were angry, some were emotional. Some accused me of abandoning Emily. One said I was trying to punish her by staying in the house. I didn't respond to most of them. I kept the messages, not because I wanted to use them against anyone, because my attorney had told me to keep communication records. Then Emily sent me something unexpected. She said she was sorry about the anniversary. She said she hadn't known her mother would invite Daniel. I believed her, at least partially. I asked why she had laughed when Linda made the comment. She said she was nervous. She said she had laughed because she didn't know how else to react. That answer didn't fully satisfy me, but I understood it. People laugh when they are uncomfortable. I had done it myself. The bigger issue was everything that happened before the dinner. We began mediation. It wasn't pleasant. Nothing about mediation is pleasant when you are sitting across from someone you once planned your entire future with. Emily initially wanted to keep the house. I was willing to sell it. Then she changed her mind. Then she wanted me to refinance and pay her share. Then she wanted to stay in the house and have me move out. Every few weeks something changed. The numbers became important. The house had increased in value. We had substantial equity. Neither of us could simply walk away without losing a lot of money. There were also retirement accounts, credit card balances, a car loan, home improvement expenses. It became less about who was right and more about what could actually be proven. That was when I understood why keeping records mattered. During mediation, Emily's attorney questioned whether some of the money I claimed was marital had actually come from my income before the marriage. I produced statements. Then they questioned the home improvements. I produced receipts. Then there was a dispute about the mortgage payments. I produced the joint account records. I wasn't trying to make Emily look bad. I was trying to make sure neither of us could rewrite history based on memory. At one point, Emily looked exhausted. I felt terrible. I told her I didn't want this. She said she didn't either. I believed her. But wanting something to end and knowing how to stop it are different things. Then Daniel disappeared from the situation. I didn't hear his name for almost 2 months. I assumed that was the end of it. Then I learned otherwise. It happened because Frank called me. He said he wanted to apologize. I didn't know what for. He told me that Linda had been talking about Daniel for months. She believed Emily had made a mistake marrying me. She had apparently contacted Daniel after hearing Emily complain about our marriage. Frank said he had warned Linda that she was crossing a line. She ignored him. He also told me something I hadn't known. Linda had been encouraging Emily to keep the house. She had told Emily that I would eventually give in because I hated conflict. That was probably true. I did hate conflict, but hearing someone had built a strategy around that weakness made me angry. Not because it was clever, because it was accurate. I had spent years trying to keep peace. People had learned they could push me because I would rather absorb discomfort than create it. That realization changed how I handled everything afterward. I stopped trying to make everyone comfortable. I started trying to be fair. There is a difference. A few weeks later, my attorney received a document from Emily's side. It claimed that some of the money used for the house had originated from a gift from Linda. That would have affected the property calculations. I checked my records. There was no gift. There had been a transfer, but it had come from a joint account. I remembered that transfer. It had been around the time we replaced the roof. Linda had sent us $12,000. At the time, Emily had said her mother wanted to help with the repairs. Now it was being described differently. I didn't accuse anyone of lying. I simply provided the bank records. The transfer had gone into our joint account. The money had been used for the roof. The contractor's invoice was in both our names. That settled that issue. Then another issue appeared. Emily's side argued that a separate savings account contained money that should not be divided. I didn't even know the account existed. That hurt. Not because of the amount. There was about $18,000 in it. It hurt because it meant there had been a financial life I didn't know about. Emily eventually admitted she had opened it after our first major argument. She said she started putting money into it because she was scared. She said she didn't know whether our marriage would last. I understood the fear. I didn't like the secrecy, but I understood it. That was one of the strangest parts of the entire process. I kept discovering things that made me angry and things that made me sympathetic at the same time. Emily wasn't a cartoon villain. Neither was I. We were two people who had handled fear badly. The difference was that her mother had gotten involved and turned uncertainty into a plan. At least that was how it looked from my side. The mediation continued. Eventually, Emily and I agreed to sell the house. We would divide the equity according to the final financial accounting. The retirement accounts would be divided through the proper legal process. We would each keep our own personal debts. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a victory. It was paperwork. And honestly, paperwork was what finally gave both of us a way out. The strangest thing happened after the house went on the market. Emily started talking to me more normally. Without her mother around, she seemed calmer. She apologized for several things. I apologized for things too. I had spent years assuming that if I kept the peace, problems would disappear. I had avoided difficult conversations. I had sometimes worked late rather than deal with arguments at home. I had treated emotional problems like practical problems. That wasn't fair to her. She admitted she had stopped communicating honestly because she didn't want to disappoint anyone. She had allowed her mother to convince her that leaving me was inevitable before she had actually decided whether she wanted to leave. That wasn't fair to me. We were both responsible for parts of the collapse. But the anniversary dinner was still different. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a deliberate humiliation. Emily eventually acknowledged that. She told me she regretted laughing. She said she had been overwhelmed and embarrassed. I told her that was the moment I stopped feeling like her husband and started feeling like an obstacle everyone was trying to move around. She cried when I said that. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was true. The house sold about 4 months later. We signed the final paperwork at an office neither of us had ever been to before. It was strange seeing our entire marriage reduced to signatures, numbers, and initials. After closing, we sat in our cars for a while. Neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, we hugged. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was two people acknowledging that something important had ended. I moved into a smaller place. It was quieter. At first, I hated it. The refrigerator made too much noise. The bedroom felt empty. I kept reaching for my phone to tell Emily something stupid about my day. Then I remembered I couldn't. That was probably the hardest part. Not losing the house. Not the money. Not even the divorce. It was losing the person who had been part of every ordinary moment. The grocery store, Sunday coffee, bad television, car problems, arguments about thermostats. Those little things disappear before you realize they were holding your life together. I didn't speak to Linda for several months. Frank occasionally checked on me. He and I actually became closer after everything. That surprised me. He told me he had spent years avoiding conflict with Linda too. He said he finally realized that keeping peace wasn't the same as having peace. That sentence stayed with me. Emily eventually moved into an apartment. She stopped seeing Daniel. I know that because she told me during one of our final conversations about the divorce. She said the anniversary dinner had made her realize how much of her life had become about other people's expectations. I didn't ask whether she still loved me. I didn't want to reopen that door. She said she had started counseling on her own. I told her I hoped it helped. Then we signed the final divorce papers. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no judge shouting, no revenge. No one got destroyed. The court approved the agreement. The house was sold. The accounts were divided. Our marriage ended. Linda was furious with me for months. She told relatives that I had manipulated Emily into leaving her family. Some people believed her. Some didn't. I stopped defending myself to everyone. That was another lesson. You cannot correct every version of you that exists in somebody else's head. Eventually, the people who mattered asked questions. I answered them honestly. I didn't send screenshots. I didn't publish messages. I didn't tell people private things just because I could. I simply told the truth when someone asked. The anniversary dinner became a family story for a while. Some relatives treated it like a ridiculous mistake. Others understood how cruel it had been. I didn't need everyone to agree. About a year later, I ran into Linda at a grocery store. It was completely random. She looked uncomfortable. I considered walking away. Instead, I nodded. She stopped me. She said she regretted how she handled everything. She said she thought she was protecting Emily. I told her I believed she thought that. I also told her that protecting someone doesn't mean choosing their future for them. She cried. I didn't know what to do with that. So I just stood there. She apologized. I accepted the apology. That didn't mean I wanted a relationship with her. It just meant I didn't need to carry the anger anymore. Emily and I became civil, eventually friendly, not friends in the way we had once been, but we could communicate without resentment. We both moved on. I heard through Frank that Emily had gotten a new job. She was doing well. I was happy for her. I also heard that Linda and Emily had repaired their relationship, although with more boundaries. That made me glad. I never wanted Emily to lose her mother. I just wanted her to make decisions that were actually hers. As for me, I started dating again eventually, very slowly. The first few dates were awkward. I had forgotten how strange it felt to explain your life to someone new. I didn't talk much about the divorce, not because I was ashamed, because I didn't want my identity to become the guy whose wife brought her ex to their anniversary dinner. But every once in a while, someone would ask what happened. I would give the short version. Sometimes I would leave out the part about Daniel. Sometimes I would mention it. The thing I always struggled to explain was why I didn't explode that night. People assumed it was because I was calm. I wasn't calm. I was furious. I was embarrassed. I felt stupid. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted everyone at that table to feel as humiliated as I did. But I also knew that if I lost control, the entire story would become about my reaction, so I didn't. I sat there. I looked at the evidence I already had. I asked questions. Then I left. That's probably the closest thing to a victory I got, not the divorce, not the house, not the money. The fact that I didn't let somebody else's decision determine who I became in that moment. Looking back, there were warning signs everywhere. The unexplained withdrawals, the lawyer's envelope, the secret savings account, the comments from Linda, the sudden changes in Emily's behavior, the way I kept telling myself everything was fine because admitting otherwise would have been painful. I don't think I was stupid. I think I was scared. There is a difference. I wanted my marriage to work, so I interpreted uncertainty as something temporary. I interpreted secrecy as privacy. I interpreted disrespect as stress. Eventually, there was too much evidence to keep doing that. The biggest lesson I took from the whole thing wasn't to distrust people. It was to stop confusing trust with ignoring facts. Trust doesn't mean refusing to look at the bank statement. Trust doesn't mean pretending a legal letter doesn't exist. Trust doesn't mean allowing someone to humiliate you and then telling yourself you are being mature by accepting it. Real trust requires honesty from both sides. When that disappears, documentation isn't paranoia. Sometimes it is simply clarity. I still have the message from that attorney. I never deleted it. Not because I enjoy remembering that night. I keep it because it reminds me of the moment I stopped trying to control what everyone else was doing and started controlling what I could actually control. My records, my decisions, my behavior, my finances, my boundaries. I didn't win my marriage back. I didn't get revenge on Linda. I didn't make Daniel disappear. I didn't walk away with some huge financial settlement that changed my life. I just made sure that when everything was finally examined, the truth didn't depend on who told the better story. The documents were there. The bank statements were there. The mortgage records were there. The messages were there. The dates were there. And once everything was laid out, nobody had to believe me. They could just look. That is what I think bothers people who manipulate situations the most. Facts don't care who is more emotional. They don't care who cries first. They don't care who has the louder family. They don't care who gets sympathy at dinner. They just sit there, waiting. And eventually they tell the story for you. I still think about that anniversary sometimes. Not because I miss it. I don't. I think about it because I remember how quickly an ordinary dinner became the moment my entire understanding of my marriage changed. I remember the cake sitting untouched. I remember Frank looking down at the table. I remember Daniel looking like he wanted to disappear. I remember Linda acting like she had arranged a perfectly reasonable solution to a problem nobody had asked her to solve. And I remember Emily laughing. That was the part that hurt the most. Not because I thought she was laughing at me intentionally. Because for 1 second, she seemed to be laughing with her mother about a future in which I wasn't even part of the conversation. That was when I finally understood that the marriage I was fighting to save might already have ended in ways I hadn't been willing to see. I wish I had realized sooner. I wish Emily had been honest sooner. I wish Linda had stayed out of it. I wish Daniel had never been invited, but none of those things happened. What happened was that I was handed a terrible situation and I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be inside it. I could have made it uglier. I could have retaliated. I could have tried to embarrass Emily publicly. I could have told everyone every private detail. I could have drained accounts and disappeared. I could have made the divorce a war. Instead, I kept records, got legal advice, stayed honest, and let the process work. It took months. It cost money. It hurt. It changed me. But when it was over, I could look back and know that I hadn't made the situation worse just because I was hurt. And honestly, that's enough for me. The last time I saw Emily was at a coffee shop several months after the divorce. We talked for about an hour. She told me she was doing better. I told her I was too. She asked whether I hated her. I thought about it for a long time. I told her I didn't. I told her I hated what happened. I hated the lies. I hated the secrecy. I hated that our families got involved. I hated that our anniversary became the night everything fell apart, but I didn't hate her. She cried. Then I did too. We hugged before leaving. There was no promise to get back together. There shouldn't have been. Some things can be forgiven without being rebuilt. I walked back to my car afterward and realized something strange. For the first time in almost a decade, nobody was waiting for me to decide whether I was going to keep the peace. I could just go home, so I did. I stopped at the grocery store on the way. I bought coffee. I bought eggs. I bought a frozen pizza because I didn't feel like cooking. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and somehow that ordinary Tuesday felt better than the anniversary dinner ever had. I think that's the part I wanted to end with. Not revenge. Not some dramatic final confrontation. Not Daniel getting humiliated. Not Linda finally admitting she was wrong. Just the fact that after everything, my life became ordinary again. And after months of paperwork, lawyers, bank statements, awkward family conversations, and realizing how much I had ignored because I wanted to believe everything was okay, ordinary felt pretty damn good. I used to think staying calm meant not showing that you were hurt. Now I think it means being hurt and still refusing to let that hurt make your decisions for you. that night. I slid my phone across the table because I had finally realized I didn't need to argue with anyone. The message was enough. The records were enough. The truth was already there. All I had to do was let everyone read it.